This
So,
conference will now be recorded.
all right, so where are we right now? So we said that there is a feature called the Azure backup and recovery service in, let's say, the Azure portal, where you can go ahead and you can say take regular application and crash consistent backups of your virtual machine. So you can do it on a regular point in time or regular period, and you can store it in something known as a recovery services vault. So you can store it in something known as a recovery services vault out there, and you can make sure that the backups are going like very frequently to the time period that you basically set it, and you can restore either your files. That's one option. Or you can recover the entire virtual machine. You can stand up a new virtual machine entirely, and which is a good, I mean, the service is good, but it is not great for a production based workload. Meaning, what I say for what I would mean by production based workload, just give me a second. Sridhar, can you please go on mute? I'm just getting some echo.
Yeah, yeah, Kevin. One second.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, great. So this is good, meaning the backup services is good for, let's say, for my applications based upon a non-production workload, where I can take keep constantly taking, let's say, backups and etc., so that I can manage my entire system and stuff like that, which is good enough for that. But the thing right now is that if, let's say, this is a production based workload, meaning that is something that your customer is like kind of interacting with it and they're doing a lot of stuff with that, it's a production workload, like it's running really, let's say, on a real time or on a live environment and etc. Can I take a backup for it? Definitely yes, recommended. But the backup and restore time, right, it's actually a lot. Like for each and every backup, right, I kind of have to, if I'm taking a full backup especially, I kind of have to wait for about an hour or so, like 1 hour or so. Like each and every backup is taking so much. That's just when I do not have anything in my virtual machine. I just have the OS. I just have like bare minimal files and etc. But let's say you are basically right now dealing with something like a disaster scenario, meaning you have created your virtual machine in, let's say, something like an East US zone, and that zone went down entirely. Now you want to take it back up again, meaning you want your application up and running back up again, and you want it done, let's say, in a very quick, at a very short span of time, in a very very short span of time. Can you do something like that? Like, can I use the backup service? Yes, definitely, but it's going to take somewhere around 45 minutes for even for you to restore your particular machine and get it back up again and all that stuff, which is, let's say, comparatively a bigger amount of time when you are looking things at, let's say, from a production base of, I mean, from a production point of view. This is comparatively a bigger point in time, because I'm asking my customers not to use my website for the next 45 minutes and etc. And that too, when, let's say, if it's a peak season, then my business is going to take a major hit. Now Azure tells you that, what, you do not really have to use the backup and service, I mean the backup and recovery services. Backups, yes, you can switch it on. You can basically take regular backups and etc. This can be, let's say, to protect you against the system crashes and etc. But for, especially for situations like disaster service, I mean, for especially something called as DR, we call very frequently something called as DR, called disaster recovery. Especially for disaster recovery, Microsoft says that, hey, you know what, there is another service for that. Backup is not the right one for this one. There is something called as disaster recovery. I will offer you something known as a disaster recovery service, where you can continuously replicate your virtual machine from one region. Meaning, let's say this virtual machine is in East US. This virtual machine, let's say, is in East US2. You can choose a secondary region. Now, the option for choosing the secondary region is up to you. Like whichever region you want it, I'll make sure to replicate it. I'll make sure to constantly replicate it. This is called continuous replication. I'll make sure that your services are constantly replicated. Your virtual machine is constantly replicated across a particular zone. and I'll just keep all the services ready. Meaning, I'll just make sure that I have the portal, I have, let's say, all the screens ready for you to immediately restart your virtual machine and make sure that your website is up and running again. Like this is going to take somewhere around 5 to 10 minutes maximum. Like I'm giving you a maximum time point of 5 to 10 minutes. And for every 5 or 10 minutes, I'll keep replicating this particular service. Meaning whenever you put files or whatever you do, I'll make sure to replicate it constantly. I'll make sure to enable the constant replication so that you are protected from unforeseen situations, like let's say a disaster and etc. For example, this particular virtual machine right now is created in a region like East US or East US 2. This is the region from which the virtual machine is actually running. What I can do right now is that I can say, okay, fine, protect me from, let's say, unforeseen situations. Like I need something like a disaster recovery. And now it says, you know what, this is your source region, and I can replicate it over a different region called West US. And I can select any other region also. I can say, you know what, my source region is, let's say, East US, and I want to replicate it over the globe into, let's say, a different region like, let's say, Switzerland, like North Europe. Or I can basically take any other region like West Europe and stuff like that. Like whichever region that I deem to be, let's say, better. In this way, I'll be able to, let's say, start something known as a replication service, meaning I'll be able to start something known as a continuous replication process. So the first step is like go to disaster recovery and select, let's say, the zone you want to replicate it to. For my convenience, I'll say, okay, fine, this is like, UK South or something like that, or let's say, let's take anywhere in Europe, let's say North Europe. So I'll just take a region called North Europe, and this is the target region just in case if there's something happens in, let's say, the entire of East US or anywhere in the US, and I want to switch over and I want to fail over. This is the term we need to use. It's called fail over. If I want to, let's say, fail over to a different region, meaning just in case something like this happens and I just want to switch my entire application to a different region, then I have, or I need something to do, or I basically need to enable something called as disaster recovery. Now, what happens? What are the services basically that you need in disaster recovery? What is the entire process? Like how exactly this happens is something that we will see right now. So I'll say, okay, fine. This is good. Like North Europe is good. Let's say advanced. And now it's gonna say, hey, you know what? I am doing like, let's say I am preparing the entire infrastructure for you. Please tell me, how do you want it? Right now, this particular virtual machine is running from a resource group called something like this. It's called, this is the source resource group. In the target, I'll go ahead and create something like hyphen ASR. Like you can create a new one, you can change the name. Yes, that's up to you, right? So you need a resource group in which this particular service, in which the replicated service is going to run. Secondly, it's saying subscription. Like it's a free trial. Since I only have a free trial subscription, I only get to choose a free trial subscription. But let's say in a scenario where I have like multiple options, like let's say in a scenario where I have, let's say, different subscriptions out there, you can also go ahead and select the subscription in which I want to replicate it to. Second thing is that the virtual network. Now for a VM, we for a VM, we have discussed that a virtual network is like one of the most important entity, right? So I'll say, okay, fine, this is the virtual network. And right now I have a virtual network called hyphen VNet. And it's telling me that, you know what, in the destination that is in like, North Europe, I'll also go ahead and create a virtual network called hyphen VNet hyphen VSR. I'm sorry, ASR, just to make sure that it is replicating things around. Second thing is telling, okay, fine, you have selected no availability. You can go for like availability set zone. What is that? We'll discuss later. But I'll say, okay, fine, same thing that I want, which is great. Proximity placement route required. And the second thing it's telling that, okay, fine, you know what? I need a storage account service. I need basically, I need you to create something known as the storage account service. And this is called a cache storage account. cache storage account or cache storage account, whatever it is. Now, why is the storage account used? Is very simple. You have your VM right now that is running, or you have your application servers that is running in EC2S or EC2S2 basically from that particular data center. What is Microsoft going to do is that this particular virtual machine will have a disk, right? A managed disk. Microsoft is going to create a storage account and continuously replicate data from this disk into this particular storage account without affecting the running VM. It doesn't want to affect the running VM, so it's creating a storage account and it's doing all the operations on this particular storage account. This is known as a staging or a cache storage account. So it's going to make sure to replicate continuously the data from the disk that is attached to the current VM into this particular storage account and just keep it ready. For what? Let's see that. So now it says, okay, fine, this is great. Now it says the replication settings. It says, you know what, this is the portal. I mean, this is the subscription that I want to, and I will create something known as a recovery services vault. The one thing that we did again, I mean, the thing that we saw again the other day. Now, in your recovery services vault, not only would you have an option to go ahead and let's say backup, you can also have an option called a replication. If you clearly observed it, you also have an option called a replication. There's also clearly called an option called replication. So it says, okay, fine, I will use the recovery services vault in order to make sure to continuously replicate your applications and keep it ready. It says, okay, fine, this is the name that I'm going to create. This is the resource group that I'm going to create. And I have a basic retention policy for 24 hours. You can also change the policy like we did the other day. So you can also change that also. It says, okay, fine, these are all the services that I'll be creating for you. So are you okay with this? I'll say, okay. And now it says, okay, fine, you know what? I agree that this is all need to be continuous. Meaning, what is this, guys? Again, this is continuous replication, meaning we are continuously making sure that the data from your virtual machine is continuously being copied from the disk to let's say the storage, and from the storage to let's say the destination. And you also have continuous replication points being created in the site recovery vault. I mean, in the site basically in something called the recovery services vault out here. Now the other day when we checked, right, what did we do is like we scheduled things, and for initially what did we say? We said backup now and all that stuff. But this service is much more advanced to it. What it's going to do is like it's going to continuously replicate, meaning for every 5-6 minutes it's going to continuously replicate your applications to make sure that it is disaster recovery enabled. For this, you can manually cannot come ahead and let's say click on backup now or click on continuous replication and all. You cannot do that manually. You need someone automatically doing it. You need someone automatically doing it, and that someone is called as an automation account. In Azure, you have something known as an automation account. That was what this particular creation wizard is kind of telling you, that you know what, hey, I'll basically create something known as an automation account that will take care of all this process. Now, what this automation account does is very simple. It will have a PowerShell script inside it, and this PowerShell script will trigger, let's say, for every 5 to 10 minutes and make sure to, let's say, replicate your entire virtual machine. And the scheduling of all these PowerShell scripts is done through the automation account. So automation account again is another complete different topic for automation. So that's something that we are actually going to see in a different class. But for now, just understand that this is nothing but a managed service. Everything that you see here is a managed service. Microsoft is managing all these things for you and giving it to you in a form of something known as disaster recovery, or this entire concept is also called ASR. Very, very, very important concept, and very, very, very frequently asked in the interviews is, can you please explain about ASR? Did you work on ASR? What is it? ASR is Azure Site Recovery. When your site especially goes down, how do you recover it and all that stuff? These are the options what I get. So I basically have a I need to create a storage account, I need to create an automation account and everything so that it will be ready. So I can say review and start replication. It says, okay, fine, I understand all that stuff, and start replication. Now, initially, in order to create all these things, right, in order to make sure that all these resources are ready, it's gonna take somewhere around 15 minutes initially. That's like the initial time period. So what I did is like I went ahead and I have like created a replication earlier yesterday in yesterday's, I mean, during yesterday's, I went ahead and created two, I mean, a resource group, and I enabled a replication for it. And my resource group is called VM replication. So what I did here is that same thing I created in East2S2, and while replicating it, in order to make sure things are easy, I just replicated it to a region like East2S. So within I replicated it within the same zone, just for my convenience. I just like went ahead and just clicked on that replication. And after this particular thing is done, right? So it says, okay, fine, I'm creating all these things and deployment is successful and all that stuff. After all these things are done, when you go to the disaster recovery, you will see something like this. Check this out, check this out. You will see something like this. It says, you know what, you are fine, you're good, meaning you have enabled the replication, and this is how your infrastructure actually looks like. It says, you know what, I have created something, or you have created something known as a VM1, and I am creating something known as a cache storage account in the same region your virtual machine is in. The cache storage account would be in the same region your virtual machine is in, and in the region that you replicated. Now, this was my replicated region. Now, this is my target region. In the target region, I have created something known as an Azure Site Recovery. Recovery Services Vault with the name Azure Site Recovery. And I have created a managed disk. Like I just created a disk. Now, what will happen is the entire things are connected by something known as an automation account. So, automation account will make sure that the data that is inside this particular virtual machine is constantly transferred to, let's say, the cache storage account. And from the cache storage account, you'll be constantly, the data is being constantly replicated, or the replication points are constantly generated in the recovery services vault. And then the data is being sent to something known as a managed disk. This is how the entire process happens. Now, if you look at, let's say, the resource groups that got created. Now, this was my resource group called VM replication. I also have something known as a VM replication ASR. If I go into it, I have a disk that is created in the target region. Now, this is my target. My source is East2S2. This is my target, which is East2S. And it went ahead and created a virtual network in that particular target region. So all these are called placeholders. So it's making sure to place all these things just to make sure that, when you perform a failover, everything is like, instantly created. And then I have something known as a recovery services vault RG. And I have something known as a cache storage account that is created in the source region, an automation account that's created in the destination region, which is East2S2, and a site recovery vault, a recovery services vault created in something known as the destination region again. So what am I creating, guys? See again, it's a virtual machine along in the, this is like the source region, which is East2S2, and this is the target region, which is East2S. So I am creating a virtual machine.
Kiran, that ECUS2 is the destination, right?
No, East2S2 is the source. Destination is East2S.
Okay, I saw that in the VM, so it's in ECUS only, not here, ECUS2.
Just a second, let me see. It's in East2S2.
Sorry, this is your the different VM. Okay, so I thought that is the first VM. Yeah.
Okay, so this is the ECUS2. So it's creating a couple of infrastructure in the source and in the destination. Okay, now this diagram basically out here, the infrastructure diagram will give it a clear clarity out here. So it says, okay, fine. This is your source, this is your destination, this is how you selected it. Great. I have went ahead and created all these things out. Like in the source, in ECS2, I said, okay, fine, VM1 and a cache storage account. In the destination, I will go ahead, create, let's say, a recovery services vault, a virtual network, and a managed disk in place, and also something known as a automation account, which is like the very important pieces that joins your puzzle, like which joins everything that you're actually doing out here. So this is how the automation account looks like. It says, okay, fine. I have went ahead, created an automation account for you. And the automation account runs on something known as jobs. It says this is, let's say, the mobility agent, and it's like constantly replicating my services and etc. And this infrastructure is ready for me. Like I don't have to do anything. This is like ready. This will be replicating. The service is going to get replicated for every 5 to 10 minutes. For example, if I look at the disaster recovery right now, I say disaster, and if I look at the disaster recovery right now, it says the last recovery point. It will you'll have something known as an RPO. The last point that I replicated, or the last replication point, is something like 58 seconds ago. Like 58 seconds ago, I went ahead and let's say, I have like done, let's say, a replication. So you can also make sure to use this out. Now, in case your service goes down, let's say your entire site is like going down, you can come here and you can do a failover, meaning all your application will now be replicated, meaning the only thing that is yet to be created is a virtual machine. That's it. The only thing that is yet to be created is nothing but a virtual machine, and that particular virtual machine gets, let's say, into the target virtual network, and the managed disk is attached to it. So all your data kind of gets replicated into that particular disk, and this particular disk is just attached to your virtual machine. This is how it will, kind of do it. Now, what I'll do for testing is that I will not perform a failover, but I will test the failover. So I'll say test the failover, and it would say, what, I'll create these resources. These are all the things, and you can, take out the last recovery point, the latest is lowest RPO. You can take in any latest points out here, and I can say, okay, fine, select the virtual network, which is the target virtual network that I have, and I will say, okay, fine. The failover direction is from the source, which is east to 2, to the destination, which is east to west. This is the direction in which we are failing over. So I'll say, okay, fine, great. Now let's do a failover. And as and when I say start the failover operation, it's going to go ahead and in the destination resource group, it'll go ahead and stand me up a virtual machine with all the data that was there in this particular virtual machine called VM1. And that virtual machine will be now called as VM-1-ASR. Now, the most important thing about this you'll have to understand is something known as the automation account, which is joining everything together. And guys, this is one of the most used concepts, guys. Like, believe me, I have like worked with servers in production workload that will not be passed to the customer without having an ASR, without having, let's say, an Azure Site Recovery agent out there, or without having the Azure Recovery services out there. So this is one of the most frequently used services out here. And we may make sure that all the production workloads have the disaster recovery and the backup service, both the things enabled. Can you do it? Yes, you can do it. You can have both the things running at the same time. Is there any downside to it? No, definitely not. Indeed, it is recommended to have all these things in place. And only once these services are in place is when we go ahead and, let's say, give the application to the customer. That's how we kind of, design all these things out here. So once this is getting created, I mean, it'll take like about 2 or 3 minutes of time to, let's say, go ahead and replicate this out, and it'll basically create, let's say, the entire virtual machine out there. So guys, in this point, does anyone have any questions? Is everyone able to follow this out? Is everyone able to follow this concept out, or does anyone have any questions basically that I can take right now? Anything, guys? Yeah.
So if we do the failover, the public IP and private IP will be the same, or it will be changed?
No, it'll be different. Yeah, public IP and the private IP would be different. because you will not be able to make sure, I mean, you cannot use the same public IP to this particular service also.
Okay. So once the failover is succeed, then we see that VM here saying that this is in East US
Yes, you
now.
can see that VM. This is the VM. Now it comes without a public IP. It's your responsibility or the user's responsibility to assign a public IP to it. So you'll have to create a new public IP and just assign to this particular virtual machine, and you're done. You're all set. So this is the virtual machine that got created. And if you perform a real failover, this virtual machine will be called as VM1-ASR and whatever name that you've given while doing that particular failover out here. Does that answer your question, Chandra?
Yes. So if we have the multiple disks, so all the other disks
All
will
the
be
yes will be replicated as well. Yes. Right now it's only the C drive basically that is getting replicated. But if you have like say like multiple disks, you'll have all the multiple disks that are getting replicated out here. And this is your entire replicated infrastructure. Everything in East-US. So you have a VM, you have a NIC card, you have data disk out here, and you have an OS disk basically. Like you had one temporary drive, right? Even that got replicated out here. And you have the placeholder virtual network basically that we had, which is VM replication VNet ASR. That is something basically that got created as in when you enable the replication out here. So biggest advantage of this is that you do not, I mean, what do you say? You do not have to, let's say, perform the failover right away. So you can save the cost on the virtual machines, like the secondary replicated virtual machines out here. But a few organizations basically go ahead and do a failover any which ways and make sure that the entire infrastructure is there, so that they can immediately switch over to it. Does that answer your question, guys? Like, does anyone has any other questions with this?
So once we do the failback, so the
Mhm.
destination VM will be deleted automatically.
Yes, you can clean up the fail. I mean, once you do a fail back again, you can clear that all that infrastructure out. For example, right now I did a test failover, right? Now this will have something called clean up the target or clean up the resources and etc. Like once the failover is completely done, I will have an option to clean over this. It says clean up the test failover. And when you do an actual failover, it will say clean up failover.
Okay, that means a cleanup test failover means it's a failback.
Yes, it's a failback. Yes, it's a fallback.
Okay.
Any further questions with this, guys? Now, this is one of the most important topics, guys. Like this is like one of the most important things that the interviewer is like very frequently going to ask about the Azure site recovery. And this is something that when you're working on an IaaS background, especially when you're working on IaaS background, this becomes very important. Now the thing is that a lot of people might have questions like, what, this is the working VM and I have a different VM out there, like a different VM basically getting created. How would you give this particular VM to the customer and all that stuff? Now that's something that there is a lot of things like load balancing and all that stuff. That is something that we will see in the classes going forward. That's something that we're going to see how we are basically managing all our disaster recovery and all that stuff. That's something that we're going to see in a broad topic called high availability. That's something that we are going to see about and talk about a lot. So any questions with regarding this particular topic, guys? Okay, fine. So these were all the concepts for backup and recovery. So we initially spoke about how to, let's say, create the virtual machine. And firstly, we spoke about all the things that are general in the virtual machine, like, the disks and all these things. And then we went into something known as the backup options. We said, okay, fine. We have something known as backup and recovery services out there, and we can take continuous and frequent backups out there. And once the frequent backups is there, we can also basically go ahead and restore all these backups. And we were talking about all that stuff. And then we talked about something known as Azure Site Recovery today. And this marks an end to, let's say, the backup and recovery concept that's being covered in, let's say, the IaaS services, especially the virtual machines. Now we have another thing, like a concept basically that is standing apart from, let's say, the backup and recovery. We have one more thing, like one more concern that I have is that I am logging into a virtual machine, which is great. And as and when I'm logging into it, I am doing what? I am doing, let's say, enabling the IIS. I am, let's say, uh, I'm uploading a lot of files into it. And I'm also making sure to install a lot of applications like antivirus and Visual Studios. And I'm doing a lot of things inside my virtual machine. So I went inside my virtual machine and did a lot of things. And right now I have a fully working virtual machine, meaning a virtual machine that is ready to host my applications, a virtual machine which is like a good workload for me to, let's say, start hosting my applications, because it has all the dependencies like the I have installed, let's say, Visual Studios into it. I have installed antivirus into it. I put in all the necessary files, and this is ready. Like this is like, production ready application. Now the thing is that I want to make sure to create another virtual machine which is an exact copy of the same, like all the softwares, everything, like to be like, well and ready. So what I would do is like I would just write down all the specifications, like, this particular virtual machine has, let's say, Visual Studio Code installed inside it. It has Visual Studio 2019 community version of it installed. It will have something like certificates installed into it. It'll have different applications, files, folders, everything installed into it. That's ready. And I want to create another, or I want to stand up another virtual machine that is just nothing but a replica of my VM1. This is like VM2. So I just want to stand up a machine, something like this, a same machine, like, the same thing. I want all the features and everything that is there in the VM1 into VM2 also. So what I'll do, I'll just write it down and I'll just stand up a new virtual machine out here, which is good, great. But now I have a requirement again telling that, hey, you know what? You did a good job. VM2 is the same replica of VM1, which is great. Now I want 20 such virtual machines, which are an exact copy of VM1, which basically are an exact copy of VM1. Meaning, what am I trying to do is that I am making sure that VM1 is a baseline for me. VM1 is the baseline for me to go ahead and create other machines that are the same copies of, let's say, VM1, right? This is, let's say, the baseline for me, using which I will create another virtual machine. But this process becomes kind of tedious, right? I mean, this process basically becomes kind of tedious when you're doing it multiple times. When you're doing it, let's say, over a multiple period of time, you're making sure that you basically produce virtual machines which are an exact replica of VM1. It gives a lot of scope for human error, and it consumes a lot of time, because it's not easy for someone to go ahead and, let's say, download the entire Visual Studio and, let's say, configure it on the virtual machine and install all the softwares and make sure that it's like an exact copy of the same thing. It takes a lot of time, firstly, and it's not advisable to do that. So is there any alternative to it? Like, is there basically an option to make sure that the VM1 is stored somehow and this becomes the baseline? This happens very frequently, guys. Like, this problem comes very frequently. And what we suggest is, convert one particular virtual machine, let's say VM1, into something known as an image. Like, whatever you want to, like, make the changes in this particular virtual machine. Like, you want to install Google Chrome onto it, you want to install, let's say, internet information services into it, you want to install Visual Studio into it, install whatever you want, and convert this entire virtual machine into an image. And this image can be now the source to create other virtual machines. And a VM2 that is created out of this particular image will be an exact replica of VM1. You do not have to even go into that machine and install all these services. Nope, we're all good. Just convert this particular VM1 into an image, and this conversion of a virtual machine into an image is called generalization. It's called generalization. We call this process as VM generalization. So VM generalization, when you come up with this term, it's nothing but converting a virtual machine into an image that can be used later. So then how can I do it? What is the procedure? What is the protocol that I need to do it? So for this, let me do a quick documentation tour. It's been a while that I've done this. So let's say VM generalization, okay, VM on Azure. Let's say this is like fine, not a problem. You need to make sure to prepare your virtual machine for the generalization process to happen. So what I do is I'll say, okay, fine, go into my virtual machine. I'll say, okay, fine, enter my password and all that stuff. Let's see. I need something known as a sysprep. Basically, I have something known as a sysprep folder. Yes, exactly. This is the folder path, what I'm just looking for. So you have an application that comes by default with a lot of Windows servers. And this application is called as a sysprep. This is the application that I was looking for. What would it do is like sysprep or system preparation is that this system preparation is going to, let's say, make your application ready for something known as a generalization or conversion of it into, let's say, something known as an image. Now, one thing before you do this, guys, is to be remembered is that once you convert your VM to an image, right, this virtual machine cannot be used again. You are destroying this virtual machine. You are destroying this virtual machine. You cannot use it again. So this process, right, it's destructive in nature. Once it is converted into an image, this process is completely destructive in nature. You will not be able to use your VM1, but you will be able to create multiple virtual machines using the image that you have generated out of the VM1. So very importantly, before you do this, you'll have to understand that you cannot go ahead and recover your virtual machine back again. So what I would do is like, I'll say, okay, fine, I'm good with that. I have all the software that I installed here. I have everything that is there. Now I'll say, okay, fine, give me a system preparation. I'll say, okay, fine, generalize. I'll take this out and I'll say generalize. And I'll say shut it down. Like once you generalize, go ahead and shut this thing down. I'll say, okay, fine, processing the cleanup, like starting up the system preparation option. I'll make sure to install everything basically. And I'll make sure that this virtual machine is generalized. So it's going to take like about a minute or two for this process to be done. So what have we done is like we went into this particular path. So all I did is I just Google thing called like this is a path that I don't really remember. I don't really put it in my memory. So this is a path basically that I just went ahead and said, okay, fine, sysprep folder path. And once that is done, I got a folder path out here called sysprep folder path and stuff like that. I just took this out, went inside this particular virtual machine out there and just said, okay, fine, start the system preparation, generalize my VM. And after the generalization is done, shut the VM down. And says, okay, fine, you know what, the virtual machine is shut down and all that stuff. So it says once if you refresh this out, refresh a couple of times, it'll still say running and all that stuff, but you won't be able to do an RDP into it. Like the machine is done. Like the machine is generalized, the machine is destroyed. So what we're gonna do is like I'll say, okay, fine, stop this machine and deallocate this machine out there. So I'll bring this machine from a running state into a deallocated state. That's the first step that I'm gonna do right now. And once this machine is coming into, let's say, a deallocated state, I'll now start the process of converting this machine into an image. Now, what I did till now is I just prepared this machine so that it can be converted into an image. And once this is done, right, let me refresh this out once again. And once this is deallocated, Now it says, okay, fine, it's deallocated, you're good now. I'll say, okay, fine. I'll now choose an option called capture. This is the option that will help you convert a virtual machine into an image. It says, hey, you know what? This is an image creation portal. You'll say, okay, fine, great. This is an image creation. Now I'll say, this is the resource group that I want to create my images in. And the images will also be created in something like East2 only. And now it's telling, okay, fine. Do you want to have a shared gallery? I'll say, no, I'll just use a managed gallery right now. I do not want to go for a shared gallery. What is that? That again is like a big concept altogether. So we'll see it in a different, class altogether. I'll say, okay, fine. I'll go ahead and let's say capture this image and manage it. And I'll say, okay, fine. Automatically delete the virtual machine after creating the image, because even this portal knows that that virtual machine is no longer being used. And now it says, I'll give a name to the image. Do you want to change this name? I'll say, okay, fine. It is VM1 image, VM1, and then image. I'll say test, something like this. So I'll say, okay, fine, this is the baseline image, and delete my virtual machine after creating the image, which is like okay with me because that virtual machine is anyways not used. So please go ahead and delete it out, and I'll say review and create. So in between tags, you can assign tags to it, optional. I'll say create. And now it says, okay, fine, successfully generalize the virtual machine. And now it's telling, okay, fine, now I am creating an image for you. And this is an actual resource. It will say, okay, fine, I'll create an image for you. And this image can be used later. How can we use this image later? We'll see. We'll look at that. So what are the steps that we did, guys? We said, firstly, go into the virtual machine and prepare it so that it can be destroyed. How do we prepare it? We go into this particular folder called system preparation, and we basically enter into a wizard called sysprep. The only thing that I did there is I just ticked the option called generalize the VM, and I said okay, and it went ahead and it said, okay, fine, I'll now go ahead and generalize your virtual machine. And it took like about a minute or two, and it generalized it. After that, I came to the portal, I stopped my virtual machine, I waited for it to go into a state called deallocated, and once it went into a state called deallocated, I went ahead and clicked on an option called capture. And on the option called capture, I said, okay, fine, this is the resource group where you need to create this image in. And I went ahead and I said, okay, fine, this is the name of the image, go ahead and create it out. And once it's created, it said, okay, fine, I have deployed an image. Like this is how your image looks like. And it's like sitting in like this so-and-so resource group called VM replication. And inside VM replication, I do not have a VM right now. See, I have like deleted my particular virtual machine out here to save my cost and all. And I have an image out here, which is called VM1-test image. Now, what can I do right now with this particular image? Is that now I can say, okay, fine, create. I can say Windows 2019 data center. And once I'm creating a virtual machine out here, I can say, okay, fine, this is VM3. I can say this is East2. And now I can say, instead of, let's say, the Windows Server 2019, I have something known as an image out here. I have something known as my image, which I created. I don't want to rely upon the marketplace, but this is an image that I created. And guys, you'll only be able to use this image if you're creating a virtual machine in the same region. So I am creating a virtual machine in the EastUS2 region. So that's the reason I'm able to see this image. I said, okay, fine, this is the image basically. This is my base image right now. Please take this and now create a virtual machine for me. So the only thing that I'm doing different is here, instead of selecting Windows Server 2019, I'm selecting the image of the virtual machine that we just created. So what is going to happen is that this image is going to contain all the things like the operating system that you wanted, the required softwares, everything. Like it's a pre-configured image with IIS, like whatever you have configured inside that particular virtual machine. You can just create this out and you can say, okay, fine, this is the image that I want to use. And the remaining procedure lies the same. You can open up ports, you can, let's say, add data drives and everything. And you can review and create a virtual machine. And the virtual machine now that is going to be standard up is something from this particular image, guys. And very importantly, please make sure before you create the image, you'll have to make sure that you'll have to basically know, or you have to note that the virtual machine from where you're creating the image cannot be used again. That is going to be destroyed. That virtual machine is going to be destroyed out there. This entire process is called the generalization of a virtual machine, or converting the virtual machine into an image as such. Guys, any questions in this? Any questions, guys?
We should create in the different region also, like east to US image.
So if you have virtual machines that are running in multiple regions, like normally what happens is that when you're working for an application, all the resources, everything will be in the same region where you're creating the resource. But let's say you have, let's say, a different virtual machine running a different workload in a different region. You'll also have to have a base image in that region. All these images, right, they are region specific. So you cannot select a virtual machine in West US and use this particular image. That will not work out. You'll have to use basically this image when you're creating a virtual machine in East US 2 only. That's how it's actually gonna work things out. Does it
Okay.
answer your question, Akila? So yes,
Yes.
you have to basically create multiple images if you have multiple regions. Any other questions, guys?
Cannot we copy this image to the different region?
No, you cannot. This is region specific. It's just like copying a virtual machine into a different region. Can we do it? Definitely no, right? It's the same thing. We will not be able to copy this image into a different region because these are very region specific out there. And if you come into this image and create a VM, right, the location is logged out here. You cannot change the location. You will not be able to change the location. That itself tells you that, you know what, these are region specific out here. And there's actually a lot of things that actually goes into the image creation. So the region is one of the most important thing, and region is something that is like static. It's like it'll give you an option only to create one particular image in one particular region. So if you have like 10 regions, go ahead and create 10 different base images. And you can now start creating your virtual machines that are, let's say, referring out to that particular image while getting created. This is how it basically goes, guys. Does it answer your question, Chandra?
Yes, thank you.
Is there any way we can download this image locally?
No, you won't be able to do that. This is actually a resource in Azure, guys. So the thing is that this is a resource in Azure. Like even if you download it on your local system, right, there is no way that you're going to use it out. Like it's just like a storage account or a virtual machine that is sitting out there in Azure. And this is Azure specific as such.
Okay.
Anything else, guys? Anything else regarding this particular concept, guys? And before I close the session for today, guys, there is one more quick concept that I want to take it on. It's called the state of a virtual machine. Now, there are 3 states to a virtual machine, guys. One, which is running. It means it's running. Second is called stopped. Third is stopped or deallocated, which is stopped brackets deallocated. Why am I covering this? Is that because this is like one of the questions basically interviewers like very frequently ask, that what are the states of the virtual machine? What do you mean by stopped and what do you mean by deallocated? Meaning, when the machine is running, it's very simple. It's like, the machine is running and it's like consuming a lot of money. It's like basically the application is running right now. But when I hit on stop from the portal, okay, when I hit a stop from the portal, I say, okay, fine, not a problem. Yes. When I hit the stop from the portal, what happens is that the machine will get deallocated. The machine is going to get deallocated, guys, when you do a stop from the portal, or let's say using a PowerShell and etc. So when I refresh the screen out a couple of times, it will let it says, deallocating it. and I will stop it and also deallocate it. Meaning what it's trying to do is that at the end of the day, this virtual machine, right, it's running out of a physical infrastructure that is in some different data center. Like you have a physical infrastructure with like you have different servers out here, and this particular machine is running out of that particular physical infrastructure hosted out of different data center out there. And what it does when you stop it from the portal is that this link is cut down, meaning that physical infrastructure is no longer provisioned to you. They will deallocate that particular physical infrastructure, and this virtual machine will just hang in there loose. Like it doesn't have an underlying infrastructure out there. What is the main advantage of it? Very simple. You're not charged for the underlying infrastructure anymore. You're not charged for the underlying infrastructure, meaning that there are no charges basically that is there for your underlying infrastructure. And once you start it again, right, this virtual machine will again be provisioned in some different server in the same data center that you select. So it'll take some different server, allocate you this particular infrastructure, and you're good to go. But if it's just stopped, now it says it's stopped, bracket deallocated, meaning you're not charged for the underlying infrastructure. But can I not deallocate it, just stop it? Yes, you can. How can you? You'll have to log inside that virtual machine and then click on shutdown inside it. You'll have to go inside that virtual machine and click on shutdown. That's when you'll go ahead and let's say stop it and not deallocate it. When you stop it, right, your underlying server will still be provisioned, meaning you'll still be billed for the underlying server. And if you start it, right, it'll be a bit quick than the state from deallocated. Like it'll come into a running state a little bit quicker than when it is in a deallocated state. The charges are higher when you do, let's say, just a stop and not deallocation. Again, how do you do a deallocate? You just have to click on the stop button, come into the portal, or using a PowerShell script, you can just stop it out here. And how do you, let's say, just do a stop and not a deallocate? Is that you will have to go inside the virtual machine and shut it down from there. That's when it'll go into a stopped state and not into a deallocated state. Now, this is called the state of a virtual machine. Like, what are the different states? 3 states: running, stopped, deallocated. 3 different states out there for the virtual machine, guys. Does it help? Like, does it have any? Do you all have any questions on this out there with this particular topic as such?
Yes, Kiran. So once we deallocated, that will be disconnected from the physical infra.
Correct.
But that is regards to the CPU and memory. But what about the disk?
So you'll still be charged for the disks, the disk that you created on the portal. That's what you're talking about, is it?
Correct.
You'll still be charged for the disk,
or
the
VM
data disk or the OS disk and etc. You'll still be charged for the disk, but the charge is very minimal. Like when you compare it to, let's say, the running virtual machine, the charge is like very minimal. They'll charge you in somewhere like cents or something like that per day.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, guys?
If we shut down a machine,
Mm-hmm.
suppose if we take 1 hour, we used
Mm-hmm.
for half an hour and we shut down that one, and again we started after some time. So that half an hour and this time will be calculated. That
Yes, it's
payment.
just like a pay as you go. Like it's just like a pay as you go out there. So if you are using this for half an hour, it's just going to charge for you for the half an hour.
Okay, okay.
So when you deallocate it, guys, you're essentially disconnecting it from the compute memory. Okay, any more questions, guys, that I can take?
If we shut down the system, then in the status, what will show? Deallocated or stop deallocated?
It'll be stopped. It'll only be stopped. It's not deallocated. If you go inside the system and shut it down, this deallocated, right? It won't come up. So it'll just be stopped out there.
But in the previous, we did that. We stopped that and again we shut down, right? So in the status, it will show stop deallocated.
It went into deallocated. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you click stop from the portal, it'll by default go into deallocation. So this were like, two different concepts that were hanging around, guys. One is VM generalization and the other is the status of the virtual machine, which was like a very small concept that I wanted to cover. And from tomorrow, we're going to look at high available options. we are going to look at the architecture of a solution, meaning when I am designing a solution, or when I'm basically designing, let's say, an application that needs to be running on a virtual machine, it's very evident that I won't put my entire application on one particular virtual machine, right? Like let's say it's a facebook.com, which they are using an IIS server in the backend, or let's say the VM in the backend basically to run their entire application. Do you all think that the application will only run on one particular server? Definitely not. They'll have tons and tons of servers. They'll have like many servers basically that are running in the backend. Now, how then basically I will divert all these requests? There is something known as a concept of load balancing, using something known as a load balancer. So we're going to look into what a load balancer is, how do you create it, what are all the options basically that are given out there while you're creating it. And there are basically there are a couple of more high available options like availability set and availability zones. That is something that we have not covered yet, so that's something that we will cover. And once that is done, we will move into a concept known as DNS. With that, we will come to an end with the entire IaaS services. And after the IaaS, we are going into PaaS, looking at Azure Web Apps and all the stuff. And after PaaS is done is when we'll move into Azure DevOps. This is the plan that we are moving on to, guys. So we are looking at a good amount of time, like about, let's say 10 to 12 days before we even hit Azure DevOps, because we want to, let's say, firstly focus on Azure, and then we will start Azure DevOps as such. That will make a lot of sense while we do Azure DevOps when. So any questions, guys, with regarding the plan or anything basically that you all want to ask?
So these are all the concepts of only Azure.
Yes, only Azure right now. I haven't touched DevOps yet. Like this is only Azure right now. In the next 12 days, it'll only be Azure. Because I have to cover the PaaS, I have to also cover a few concepts that are there in the IaaS. So it's only Azure right now. And Azure Web Apps and all these things are like, again, very important concepts. And even there you have something known as high availability and all that stuff. We are also going to discuss that. And then we are going to move into DevOps.
Okay.
Okay. Is a Terraform is a part of the DevOps or it's a different?
So Terraform is again the open source, right? So what I'm going to do right now is that firstly, we'll focus upon everything that is related to Microsoft and Azure related, like native to it, like ARM templates, PowerShell, and etc. And once we complete DevOps, is we're going to touch Terraform, Jenkins, Octopus, Dockers, and Kubernetes. This is something that we're going to touch once we are done with Azure DevOps. Because that will make my life a bit easier, because once I complete DevOps, right, those terminologies will be a bit easy for you to understand when we move especially into Jenkins and Octopus and etc. And Chandra, just to answer your question, so Terraform ARM templates, right, they come into a wide concept called infrastructure as code. That's something that we're going to look into what in DevOps and etc. So those are going to come under that broad concepts called infra as a code.
Okay, great.
Okay, any further questions, guys? Okay, if there are no further questions, then we can call it a day, and we can meet tomorrow and we can discuss more on the IaaS platform.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, hello. Does anyone have a question? Sorry.
I have a doubt.
Yeah, please go ahead.
How to create an RTP for the local machine?
I'm sorry. Your voice is not audible. I'm sorry.
Yeah, how to create an RTP for the local machine?
How to create what?
RTP, remote desktop connection for our local machine.
No, you won't be able to do for your local machine. For your if you want to do an RDP for your local machine, you'll have to at least have a Windows 10 Pro operating system. Does it answer your question, Avinash? Like, you want to convert your local system into an RDP? I didn't get you.
Yes, I want to convert my local machine into an RTP. So that I
That
can
for that
access,
you, yeah,
so that I can access my local machine with another system.
no, you won't be able to do that until unless you have something known as Windows 10 Pro operating system. Like anything apart from above than Windows 10 Pro is something that will offer you something known as remote connections and etc.
Is that connected to Azure?
No, it's not connected to Azure. No, it's completely connected to Windows. Okay, guys, let me stop the recording and
by using